Hello, MCU fans! Today we're going to take a look at whether or not the Defenders series works better in late fall of 2016, because the wiki is considering moving it from May timeframe to late fall on the 2016 timeline, but unfortunately the move is a little trickier than it seems at first. So there will be mild spoilers for some of those original Netflix shows, but as long as you're okay with that, then let's dive right in and see what we can find out. Don't forget, we have an October contest running all month long. Be a subscriber, leave a comment. You could win a book or a steelbook. Best of luck. And we have a membership option with lots of cool perks, so you might check it out. Plus, hang around to the end of the video, and we'll talk about the Doomsday Countdown rewatch on the Discord. All right, so the first question is, where is the Defenders series on the Disney Plus timeline? Well, right now, it is located between Iron Fist and Civil War. And it's very important that we pay attention to this timeline because Brad Winderbaum himself has said this is how Marvel defines canon. So for now, it is nestled between Iron Fist and Civil War. So if we go to look at the Defenders timeline, and in fact in the middle you can see the Defenders timeline itself, and then over on the left you can see the main MCU movies and where they align with the timeline. Well, first of all, if you saw my previous video, you know that the wiki has shifted Daredevil Season 1 from January to February of 2015 into November to December of 2014. And you can check out that video if you want to know why. Well, that was easy for them to do because they had wiggle room to move it around. The trick is the Defenders is nestled right between Iron Fist and Civil War, right? We saw that on the Disney Plus timeline, meaning there really isn't much wiggle room, certainly not to move it all the way to fall. So, okay, let's start by talking about why it was originally placed in May of 2016. And that journey starts with Iron Fist season number 1. Okay, so why was it placed in February to March of 2016? Well, there's really one main huge reason. Season 1, Episode 1 includes what certainly seems to be a Chinese New Year festival. In other words, celebrating the beginning of the Chinese New Year. And in fact, we see from some of the masks being worn, it's the Year of the Monkey. And that aligns perfectly with the New Year beginning in February 8th of 2016. So assuming this is a Chinese New Year celebration, then February of 2016 works really well. Then we learn about how much time there is between Iron Fist Season 1 and Defenders. So Jessica Henwick in an interview said it's a couple months. And then in another interview, she says specifically it's a month. We find her a month after we left her. Then we see that Empire Magazine says it's about 2 months. And actually, in the actual Defenders series itself, Season 1, Episode 3, we learn that Danny Rand has been off the grid for months. So, okay, whether it's 1 month, 2 months, 3 months, we hear this consistent, it's about 2 to 3 months later. Well, that works perfectly. If Iron Fist Season 1 is in February to March of 2016, then Defenders Season 1 can be in May of 2016, 2 to 3 months later. All right, so what do we learn about Daredevil Season 2? How much time is there between it and Defenders Season 1? Well, this is even more clear. Charlie Cox said 6 or so months have passed. And then in another interview, he said in the 6 months since Daredevil Season 2 ended, this show begins. So he's making it really clear. 6 months have passed. All right, what do we learn from the actual Defenders series? Well, in episode number 3, Elektra is resurrected months ago, because we get this little graphic saying months ago, and we get this flashback to Elektra being resurrected after, of course, the end of Daredevil Season 2. So months fits within the 6 months that Charlie Cox said. So, okay, look at that. We're now 6 months after Daredevil Season 2. We get Defenders in May of 2016. Everything seems to be aligning perfectly. So how about Jessica Jones Season 2? How long is it after the Defenders series? Well, Rachel Taylor, who plays Trish Walker, was told it was about 6 months to a year since the Defenders. Okay, well, that works because Jessica Jones Season 2 is in April to June of 2017. Again, you can check out more extensive timeline videos on why it's placed there, but that is within that range of 6 months to a year after Defenders. So you can see why this May 2016 date seemed to really work well. Everything was aligning perfectly. Well, everything until Daredevil Season 3. So, in Season 3, Episode 5 of Daredevil, Karen is asked, how long has it been since you've seen Murdoch? And her answer is months. And there's other times they mention this range of months. In Episode 3, Matt tells Foggy he's had a rough couple of months. Yeah, that's an understatement. He's been through hell and back since the Defenders series. But the bottom line is months. It's only been a couple months. Well, this sure looks like more than a couple months, right? It has been a full year and a half between Defenders Season 1 and Daredevil Season 3. So what I think happened is, when Daredevil Season 3 came out, they basically retconned Charlie Cox saying there was only 6 months between Daredevil Season 2 and Defenders Season 1. So in other words, Defenders now needs to move somewhere in between, somewhere in the middle between season 2 and season 3 of Daredevil. But I can totally see why the wiki originally placed Defenders season 1 in May of 2016. They just didn't really reevaluate it after Daredevil season 3 came out. All right, so before we look at Defenders though, we need to take a hard look at Iron Fist season 1 because the wiki reevaluated it along with Defenders season 1. All right, so let's take a real close evaluation of Iron Fist Season 1's timeline placement. So, Episode 1, this weather honestly looks like late spring or maybe even early summer. Here again in Episode 1, this is looking like, probably late spring. Here we see trees with flowers budding on them. And then here all the way in Episode 10, this is looking definitely like we're late spring, maybe early summer. So that February to March placement doesn't really work with the weather, but are there other indicators? Well, we do get this June 8th date on the telephone. Of course, it's a really weird telephone. Look at that. There's 2 different times listed, and neither one really works because this is happening at night. So it's definitely messed up for multiple reasons, but it is a June date. Then here's another phone, and that has actually a July date on it. So we're looking like, late fall, early summer here. Now, I will say this July date is on screen for under a second. So the dude just swipes and it vanishes. But still, it is a July date. And then here again, we get another July date. A little hard to read, I know it's blurry, but this says Western U.S. Operations Sheet, and then has a date of looks like maybe 7/5 or 7/6 of 2016. Okay, so that's 3 times we've seen a June or July date. Now, granted, these dates could be when it was filmed and not necessarily intentional, but the evidence is mounting for a June-July timeframe. But now let's look at Danny and everything we learn about him, because this is going to make it really clear when this series is happening. Okay, so he says he was born April 1st. That's helpful. And then in episode 3, he goes to visit his gravestone, and unfortunately, typical Marvel, hiding the date on the gravestone, darn it. But we can get a little bit from it. I mean, definitely it syncs up with the April 1st birthday, and then it's 1990-something, and then he died in a month that ends in Burr, that's for sure. So September, October, November, December, but yeah, definitely ends in Burr. All right, so the prop gives us a little bit of information. At least the design for the prop was April 1st, yay, but then 1992, and then September 1st of 2002 for his date of death. And notice also it's 10 years apart. Keep that in mind. But we are going to find that 1992 and 2002 don't really work very well, so that might be why they covered those up. So, okay, we learn in episode 3 that he broke his arm in July of 2001. He says, was pretty sure it was July 2001, and I broke my arm skateboarding. So hang on to that thought. That's going to be important because in episode 4, he tells us he was 10 when the plane crashed. Remember, the gravestone showed 1992 to 2002, so he was 10. And of course, everybody thought he died at that point, right? He was 10 years old when he went on a jet with his parents, and I lost my family in that crash and became the lone survivor. Okay, so that's fitting really well with him being 10 when the crash occurred, and obviously this has to be after the skateboarding incident because, he's gone for the next 15 years. So we know we're after July of 2001 when this occurred. Okay, we also know that it had to be after the release of the first iPod because we see that he has one there in the snow. And for what it's worth, the first iPod was released in October of 2001 and went on sale November 10th of 2001. Now, I will say, the Rands were filthy rich, so if anybody could have gotten an early version of this, it would be them, but still, placing it around the October timeframe of 2001 would make sense. We do see this iPod showing up again in present day, so it was very important to Danny. Notice he's kind of strung it together there. He's playing hip-hop music. I love that. And then this dude's like, nice iPod. So, the iPod actually is relevant to the plot. Okay, then we learn what I kind of alluded to before, that present day is 15 years after that plane crash. Because here they're saying 15 years since Danny and his parents died. And Danny says, I was living in a monastery for 15 years. In fact, there's 8 times where they mention 15 years since that crash. So that's a fact we know for certain. All right, and then finally, let's look at a prop. And you always got to be careful with these props because, like we saw with the gravestone, they may not necessarily be accurate. But for what it's worth, this part of this newspaper article confirms that he was in the Himalayas after a plane crash 15 years ago. Okay, so that's consistent. So maybe then we can also trust this, which says Mr. Rand, a 25-year-old newly minted billionaire. So that tells us he's currently 25. Okay, so let's put all this together. He He was born sometime in the 1990s on April 1st. He broke his arm in July of 2001. He was 10 when that crash occurred. He had an iPod with him. Now he's 25 years old, and he disappeared 15 years ago. All right, so I'm going to go with April 1st of 1991, which would mean the crash occurred probably around October of 2001, and that if he's 25 years old, that would mean we have to be sometime after April 1st of 2016, and since he disappeared 15 years ago, that we're currently sometime near the October of 2016 timeframe. Now, why am I picking these years? Well, if he crashed in 2002, like we saw on that gravestone, then 15 years after that, we'd be in 2017. And that just doesn't work. And since we know he's 25, then 1992 plus 25, again, we're well into 2017, and that does not work. It has to be in 2016. Okay, so the key points are it's after April 1st of 2016 and sometime around the October of 2016 timeframe for it to be a 15-year gap. So we can immediately see that this February to March doesn't work because we have to be after April 1st for him to be 25. So that would mean that that Chinese celebration that we saw was just that, a Chinese celebration, but not necessarily a New Year celebration. And that would allow us to move to June to July of 2016 for Iron Fist Season 1. That fits with what we saw on the phone. It fits with the weather. And of course, it fits with Danny Rand's past. All right, so now let's talk about the Defenders placement. Obviously, we know it needs to move forward because it's after Iron Fist Season 1, and it's supposedly around 3 months afterwards, so that's already pushing us into an October-November timeframe, but let's see what we learned from the series itself. All right, so a lot of people point to episode number 1 on Jessica's laptop. We see this very small and very blurry date, but it does say 11/7 of 2016. So you're like, yay, there you go, we have the placement. Well, not necessarily. This is probably the date it was filmed because this episode was filmed around this time frame. But more importantly, episode 1 can't be in November. It has to be in October. Why? Well, that's because Karen, there in the middle, with all the other supporting characters, I love when they got them all together to protect them. But anyway, she shows up in Defenders, and then she shows up in The Punisher. Now, Punisher Season 1 is 100% in November of 2016. You can check out my videos on that if you want to know more about its timeline placement. But the point is, you can't have Karen showing up in Defenders and then in Punisher Season 1 if the first episode of Defenders is November 7th. It just doesn't work. So while it's nice to see this 11/7/2016 date, it really doesn't help us. On the other hand, Episode 6 does really help us, because notice we see barren trees in the background, there's snow in the lower left-hand corner, and everyone is wearing cold weather clothing. Obviously, Matt and Jessica are, but you can see the dude in the background is, and several other people are. So, okay, this is looking like an October to November timeframe, right? So then we do get this quote from Matt saying that he was investigating the hand last year. Of course, he's referring to Daredevil Season 2, and he's saying it was last year. Well, that works no matter what the placement because we're in 2016 and Daredevil Season 2 was in 2015, right? Last year. But it is kind of nice for it to be the end of 2016 because then it's almost a full calendar year. But regardless, this line doesn't help us a ton. But this line really does help us. So in Daredevil Season 3, Episode 2, Karen is looking at respiratory illness spikes. Notice she says, reports of respiratory illnesses among residents of a particular block. She says they've spiked. They're up 45% from last year. And in particular, she says Midland Circle adjacent. So she's referring to the end of the Defenders season, and she's telling us that we've seen this spike from last year. Now, here's the key. Since she doesn't give the month range of this supposed last year 45% spike, we have to assume she's talking right now, present day in Episode 2 of Season 3, compared to 1 year ago, exactly 1 year ago, because the stat means nothing if it's not a stat from a full year, right? Not more than a year, not less than a year. All right, well, that really helps because Daredevil Season 3 is definitely an October to November timeframe, and 1 year back would place Defenders Season 1 in the October to November timeframe. So, okay, that's fantastic, right? That's why the wiki is saying move it from May of 2016 to October to November of 2016. Okay, so now let's see how this works with the overall placement of the other shows around it. So first of all, Daredevil Season 2, I alluded to this earlier, but we have to throw out Charlie Cox's 6 months later statement. I mean, I think he was probably correct originally, but clearly they moved the Defenders later to put it closer to Daredevil Season 3. So unfortunately, Charlie Cox's 6 month, that's out. On the other hand, now we fit perfectly with Daredevil Season 3 because remember, there's multiple times where they said that it was months ago that Defenders Season 1 happened. Well, I mean, we're at 11 months, but it is still months. So we've split the difference between Daredevil Season 2 and Season 3 with Defenders Season 1 right in the middle. All right, so what about Iron Fist? Well, this one works perfectly because remember they said it was, 2-3 months. We saw a couple different quotes, but it works well. We are 3 months after Iron Fist Season 1, so great. What about Jessica Jones Season 2? Well, we're still within that range of 6 months to a year. So, all right, this new placement for Defenders really works well. However, that means now we need to move Civil War to be earlier, right? Civil War is now prior to both Iron Fist Season 1 and Defenders Season 1. Uh-oh, here's where we have our problem. Because if we go back to that Disney Plus timeline, remember, here's Iron Fist and here's Defenders as they currently sit on the Disney Plus timeline. If the wiki were to move the placement of those two seasons, it would look like this. Civil War, Black Widow, Black Panther, then Iron Fist Season 1, then Spider-Man Homecoming, then Defenders, and then finally Punisher. Okay, so you say, well, why won't the wiki just move it? Well, because the wiki is following what Brad Winderbaum himself said, that this Disney Plus timeline is what Marvel considers canon. Well, here's the irony of all this. Probably, we don't know, but probably the Disney Plus timeline looked to the wiki for these initial placements because they're obviously not in the timeline book yet. They haven't been canonized in that fashion, so why not look at the wiki for a reference? So you see this cat and mouse game now. It's like, oops, the wiki had dates that they later found out they weren't pleased with. Disney Plus went with those dates, and now the wiki can't move to the better timeline placement. So here's the challenge to everyone. If you know anybody at Disney Plus, anybody at Disney, anybody at Marvel, reach out to them. Tell them that they should either check out this video or at least try to reevaluate these placements because the wiki really wants to fix this, and they just can't right now. So, okay, tell me your thoughts. Do you think the wiki is correct that Iron Fist Season 1 and Defenders Season 1 need to move to these locations? And of course, are you willing to, try to help get the word out everywhere we can? And I should point out that I'm not going to yet move my Google Sheet timeline document. Remember, that's sorted by timeline month and year, but you can sort by release month and year by using this option here. And if you filter by, let's say in this case, the old Netflix shows, then you get these shows here, but I am still keeping it in February to March and May for Iron Fist and Defenders until we hopefully convince Disney Plus to move their placements. So, all right, let me know your thoughts about all this. I will say that I've talked to the folks that run the wiki, and they have said they have reviewed every single pre-Disney Plus show at this point. They re-reviewed Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Runaways, Cloak and Dagger, Agent Carter, Inhumans, you name it, so that this won't happen again. But right now, we're in this weird place with Defenders, so let me know your thoughts. You know I love to read and respond to everything. And don't forget, we have that October contest. Be a subscriber, leave a comment, win a book or a steelbook. And there's the membership option in case you're interested in that. Plus, I always love to mention the Discord. Here we are in the timeline chat, and Drew is laying out all the reasons that he feels Defenders should move to that October to November timeframe. And I also promised I would talk about the Doomsday Countdown Watch. Every day listed here at 7 p.m. Eastern, we'll watch a different movie or show as we head towards the December 18, 2026 release of Doomsday. So we have 2,400 members across the globe, conversations 24/7, and I'll leave a pinned comment so you can join. Also, if you don't mind, like this video, subscribe if you haven't already. You can check out more content, and we'll all continue to enjoy the ever-growing, the ever-changing Marvel Cinematic Universe.